The words came out of Marcus Holloway's mouth like shards of broken glass, each one cutting deeper than the last. "I'm sorry, but this isn't going to work. You're just too fat for me." He didn't whisper it. He didn't have the decency to lower his voice or soften the blow with any pretense of kindness. He said it at full volume in the middle of Venetian Rose, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, where the crystal chandeliers cast a warm, romantic glow over tables filled with couples celebrating anniversaries, proposals, and the quiet intimacy of a Friday night. Claire Sanderson sat frozen in her chair, her hand still extended across the white linen tablecloth, where, just seconds earlier, she'd been reaching for the bread basket. The entire restaurant seemed to inhale as one, a collective gasp of disbelief that was followed by the most suffocating silence Claire had ever experienced. It was the kind of silence that screamed louder than any noise, the kind that made every nerve in her body light up with shame. Marcus stood up, his 6'2" frame towering over the table. He was wearing a Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, his dark hair perfectly styled, his jaw sharp enough to cut diamonds. He was, by conventional standards, devastatingly handsome, and he knew it. That knowledge radiated from him like heat from a fire, an arrogance so deeply embedded in his DNA that it colored every movement, every word, every dismissive glance. "I mean, your photos were clearly from a few years ago," he continued, his voice dripping with disdain. "I don't appreciate being catfished. I have standards, and I'm not going to lower them just to spare your feelings." He pulled out his wallet, dropped two $20 bills on the table without even looking at them, and added, "That should cover your appetizer. Try the salad next time instead of the bread." And then he turned on his polished Oxford shoes and walked out, his exit as dramatic and deliberate as his entrance had been confident. The heavy oak door of the restaurant swung shut behind him with a soft, final click that seemed to echo in the stunned silence. Claire couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. The world had narrowed to a single pinpoint of excruciating awareness. She could feel every single pair of eyes in the restaurant on her. She could hear the whispers starting, the low murmur of voices trying and failing to be discreet. A woman at the table to her right leaned toward her companion, her hand cupped around her mouth, but Claire could still hear the words. "Can you believe he just said that? I mean, she's not even that big. He's horrible." The words were meant to be supportive, but they landed like another punch to Claire's gut. She's not even that big. As if there was a threshold, a line in the sand, where cruelty became acceptable. As if Marcus would have been justified if she had been bigger. Claire's vision blurred. She felt the hot sting of tears gathering behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of all these strangers who were now viewing her as an object of pity, a cautionary tale they would tell their friends over brunch tomorrow. She reached for her purse with trembling hands, her mind screaming at her to move, to get out, to disappear into the night and never show her face in public again. But her body wouldn't cooperate. Her legs felt like lead. Her hands were shaking so badly that she dropped her purse and the contents spilled across the floor. Lipstick, keys, her phone, a pack of tissues, all of it scattered beneath the table like evidence of her inability to hold herself together. "Miss?" A voice, soft and concerned, cut through the fog of her humiliation. "Miss, please don't move. I'll get those for you." Claire looked up through the blur of unshed tears and saw a man kneeling beside her table. He was wearing the black vest and white shirt of the restaurant's bar staff, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms marked with faded scars and the kind of lean muscle that came from hard, honest work. His face was kind, weathered in a way that suggested he'd seen his share of the world's cruelty and had somehow managed to retain his humanity anyway. His eyes, a warm hazel flecked with gold, held hers for just a moment, and in that moment, she saw something that made her throat tighten even more. She saw recognition. Not of who she was, but of what she was feeling. He knew this pain. "I'm Jake," he said quietly, gathering her things with careful, efficient movements. "I'm one of the bartenders here. I saw what happened, and I just want you to know that man is a coward and a fool, and you don't deserve a single second of what he just put you through." His words were simple, direct, and entirely unexpected. Claire blinked, her tears finally spilling over, tracing hot paths down her cheeks. She opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came out. What could she possibly say? Thank you for witnessing my complete and total humiliation? Jake handed her purse back to her, now neatly repacked, and stood up. He glanced around the restaurant, his expression hardening slightly as he took in the stares, the whispers, the way people were still watching Claire as if she were a spectacle rather than a human being in pain. Would you like me to call you a car? He asked, his voice still gentle but with an edge of protectiveness that surprised her. Or if you'd prefer, there's a private exit through the back. You won't have to walk through the dining room. Claire's first instinct was to take the escape route, to flee through the back like a criminal avoiding detection. But something in Jake's eyes stopped her. It wasn't pity. It was respect. He was offering her a choice, treating her like a person with agency, not a victim to be managed. She started, her voice cracking. She cleared her throat and tried again. I think I need a minute. Take all the time you need, Jake said. He gestured to the bar, which was situated along the far wall of the restaurant, partially separated from the main dining area by an elegant partition of frosted glass and dark wood. If you'd like to sit at the bar, I can get you some water, maybe some coffee, whatever you need. It's quieter over there. Claire nodded, not trusting herself to speak again. She stood up on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else and followed Jake across the restaurant. She kept her eyes fixed on his back, refusing to look at the other diners, refusing to acknowledge the weight of their stares. Each step felt like walking through quicksand, but she forced herself to keep moving. The bar was indeed quieter, tucked away from the main dining room spotlight. There were only a few people seated at the polished mahogany counter, and they were absorbed in their own conversations, their own worlds. Jake gestured to a stool at the far end, near where the bar curved around toward the kitchen entrance. This is the best seat in the house, he said with a small, sad smile. You can see everything, but everything can't quite see you. Claire sank onto the stool, her entire body sagging with exhaustion. She felt like she'd just run a marathon while carrying a piano on her back. Jake moved behind the bar with practiced ease, filling a glass with ice water and setting it in front of her along with a small plate of lemon slices. I'm not supposed to do this, he said, reaching beneath the counter and pulling out a small, worn leather journal and a pen. But sometimes people need to get things out of their head and onto paper. It helps. He placed them next to her water glass. If you want to write, yell, draw angry stick figures, whatever, this is a judgment-free zone. Claire stared at the journal, then at Jake. Why are you being so nice to me? Because someone should be, he replied simply. He glanced over his shoulder toward a small table in the corner of the bar area, partially hidden behind a tall potted plant. And because my daughter is sitting right over there doing her math homework, and I want her to grow up in a world where people stand up for each other when it matters. Claire followed his gaze and saw a little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, with sandy blonde hair pulled back in a slightly messy ponytail. She was hunched over a notebook, her tongue poking out of the corner of her mouth in concentration, a pencil clutched in her small hand. She looked up, felt her father's eyes on her, and waved cheerfully before returning to her work. Her name is Lily, Jake said, his voice softening in a way that only a parent's voice can when speaking about their child. Friday nights are tough for childcare, so she comes here with me, does her homework, reads her books, occasionally steals cherries from the garnish station when she thinks I'm not looking. Despite everything, despite the crushing weight of humiliation still pressing down on her chest, Claire felt the smallest flicker of a smile try to break through. She's beautiful. She's my whole world, Jake said. There was something in his voice, a depth of feeling that spoke of loss and love intertwined. Her mother passed away 4 years ago. It's been just the two of us ever since. I'm sorry, Claire whispered. So am I, Jake replied, every single day. He picked up a bar towel and began wiping down the counter, his movements automatic, his mind clearly elsewhere. I used to be a therapist, actually. Had a whole practice downtown, worked with kids and families, helped people through their worst moments, and then I had my own worst moment, and I realized I couldn't heal anyone else when I was so broken myself. Claire looked at him with new eyes. This wasn't just a kind bartender. This was a man who understood pain from the inside out, who had walked through his own fire and come out the other side, scarred but still standing. "So you became a bartender?" she asked. "I became a father first," Jake corrected gently. "The bartending is just how I pay the bills. But it's not a bad job, honestly. People tell you things at a bar that they'd never say in a therapist's office. They're more honest when they think you're just the person pouring their drink. And sometimes, on nights like tonight, I get to be exactly where I need to be when someone needs exactly what I can offer." "Which is what?" Claire asked. "A journal and some ice water?" "No," Jake said, meeting her eyes with an intensity that took her breath away. "Witness, I'm offering to be a witness to your pain, to see you as a whole person, not as the punchline to some cruel man's joke. Because that's what you needed 5 minutes ago when you were sitting at that table, and that's what I can give you now." Claire felt something crack open inside her chest, a dam that had been holding back years of accumulated hurt, rejection, and self-doubt. The tears came in earnest now, silent and steady, streaming down her face faster than she could wipe them away. Jake didn't try to stop her or offer empty platitudes. He simply stood there, a quiet presence on the other side of the bar, occasionally refilling her water glass, giving her the space to fall apart without making her feel like she had to explain or justify her pain. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 10 minutes, Claire finally spoke. "His name is Marcus Holloway. He's a hedge fund manager. Our mutual friends set us up because they thought we'd be perfect together. Both successful, both single, both in our 30s. They showed him my photo and he said I looked interesting. They showed me his photo and I thought he looked nice." She laughed bitterly. "Nice? What a joke." "The photos you showed him," Jake said carefully. "Were they really from years ago?" Claire shook her head. "They were from 3 months ago. I haven't gained or lost weight in years. I'm a size 14, and I've been a size 14 since college. I'm healthy, I'm active, I like my body most days. But Marcus took one look at me and decided I wasn't worth even a single conversation because I don't look like the women in his gym or on his Instagram feed." "Then Marcus is a fool," Jake said flatly. "And I mean that in the most clinical therapeutic sense. He's a fool who has confused aesthetic preference with human value, who has spent so much time in his own shallow end of the pool that he's forgotten what depth looks like." Claire picked up the journal Jake had given her and ran her fingers over the worn leather cover. "Do you know what the worst part is? It's not even what he said, horrible as that was. It's that a part of me, this awful, traitorous part of me, thinks he might be right, that maybe I am too fat, that maybe I don't deserve love or respect or basic human decency because I don't fit into the narrow little box that society says is acceptable. That part of you is wrong," Jake said. His voice was no longer gentle. It was fierce, almost angry. "That part of you has been fed lies by a sick culture that profits from your self-hatred. That part of you needs to be told, loudly and repeatedly, that it's wrong." Before Claire could respond, before she could process the raw emotion in Jake's voice, the heavy oak door of the restaurant swung open again, and Marcus Holloway walked back in. Marcus strode through the restaurant with the same confidence he'd displayed on his exit, his eyes scanning the tables with barely concealed irritation. He wasn't looking at people. He was looking past them, through them, as if they were merely obstacles between him and whatever he'd come back to retrieve. His gaze landed on the table where he'd left Claire, and his expression shifted to one of mild annoyance when he saw it was empty. Jake felt Claire stiffen beside him at the bar. She'd gone completely still, her hands frozen around the water glass, her breathing shallow and quick. He could see her preparing to flee, to use that back exit he'd offered earlier, to disappear before Marcus could inflict any more damage. But something in Jake's chest tightened with a fury he hadn't felt in years. Not since Emma's doctor had told him there was nothing more they could do. Not since he'd held his wife's hand and felt it go cold. Not since he'd realized that the world was full of preventable cruelty and good people did nothing but watch. He couldn't watch anymore. "Stay here," Jake said quietly to Claire. It wasn't a command. It was a promise. "I've got this." Before she could protest, before his own rational mind could talk him out of it, Jake moved out from behind the bar and walked directly toward Marcus. His years of therapy training kicked in automatically. Keep your voice calm. Maintain non-threatening body language. Lead with empathy, even when the person doesn't deserve it. But underneath that professional veneer, something else was burning. Something that sounded a lot like his late wife's voice saying, "If you see injustice and you stay silent, you're complicit." Marcus was at the table now, scanning the surface, his expensive watch nowhere in sight. He flagged down a passing server with an imperious wave. "Excuse me, I left a Patek Philippe here about 20 minutes ago. Did anyone turn it in?" The server, a young woman barely out of college, shook her head nervously. "I'm sorry, sir. I haven't seen it. Let me check with the host stand." "Well, hurry up about it," Marcus snapped. "That watch costs more than you make in a year." That was when Jake reached him. He didn't touch Marcus, didn't invade his space, just stood there at a respectful distance and said, in a voice loud enough to carry through the dining room, "I believe you left something else here too." Marcus turned, his eyes narrowing as he took in Jake's bartender vest, the rolled-up sleeves, the working man's hands. His lip curled slightly. "I'm sorry. Do I know you?" "No," Jake said, "but you should know the woman you humiliated about 20 minutes ago. You should know her name, her story, her dreams, her fears, her worth as a human being. But you don't because you didn't bother to ask. You took one look at her body and decided that was all the information you needed to render judgment." The restaurant had gone quiet again, but this was a different kind of silence. This wasn't the shocked, uncomfortable quiet that had followed Marcus's initial cruelty. This was the electric silence of people leaning forward in their seats, of conversations stopping mid-sentence, of everyone's attention focusing on the confrontation unfolding before them. Marcus's face darkened. "This is none of your business." "You made it everyone's business when you said what you said at full volume in a public place," Jake replied. His voice was still calm, still measured, but there was steel underneath. "You wanted an audience for your cruelty. Well, now you have an audience for the response." "I don't have to listen to this," Marcus said, turning away dismissively, "especially not from the help." "You're right, you don't have to listen," Jake agreed. "But you're going to, because someone needs to say it, and clearly no one in your life has had the courage or the decency to tell you the truth." He took a breath, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed. It was no longer the calm, clinical tone of a therapist. It was the raw, honest voice of a man who'd seen too much pain and couldn't stay silent anymore. "That woman you just destroyed? Her name is Claire, and in the 10 minutes I've known her, I've learned more about kindness and resilience than you'll probably learn in your entire life. She came here tonight, vulnerable, hopeful, willing to take a chance on connection, despite all the ways the world has probably told her she's not enough. And you repaid that courage with the cheapest, cruelest, most cowardly act I've ever witnessed?" Marcus laughed, a short, sharp bark of derision. "Oh, this is rich. The bartender's giving me a lecture on morality." "I'm not a bartender," Jake said quietly. "I mean, I am, but that's not all I am. Just like Claire isn't just a body for you to judge, and your watch isn't just a status symbol for you to wave around. We're all more than the surface-level things you've decided define us. But you can't see that, can you? You've spent so much time building walls of money and status and physical perfection that you've forgotten what it's like to be human." A woman at a nearby table stood up. She was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and the kind of elegant posture that spoke of old money and good breeding. "Young man," she said to Marcus, her voice cutting through the room like a blade, "I've been coming to this restaurant for 30 years. I've celebrated birthdays here, anniversaries, graduations. I've never once seen anything as disgraceful as your behavior tonight." Her husband stood as well, placing a hand on her shoulder in solidarity. "She's right. You ought to be ashamed of yourself." Marcus looked around, his confident facade starting to crack. "You people don't know what you're talking about. I have every right to have standards, to choose who I want to date." "You have every right to your preferences," Jake said. "What you don't have the right to do is weaponize those preferences to destroy someone's dignity. You could have sent a polite text after the date. You could have said you didn't feel a connection. You could have shown even a fraction of the respect that every human being deserves. But you didn't. You chose cruelty, and you chose it publicly, because you wanted her to feel small. Well, congratulations. You succeeded." But you know what else you did? Jake took a step closer, his hazel eyes locked on Marcus's face. You revealed exactly who you are. You showed everyone in this restaurant that beneath the expensive suit and the perfect hair and the fancy watch, you're empty. You're a hollow man who measures his worth by his ability to make others feel worthless. And that's the saddest thing I've seen in a long time. Marcus's face had gone red, a vein pulsing visibly in his temple. You self-righteous piece of trash. Do you have any idea who I am? I could buy this restaurant with my bonus check. I could have you fired with one phone call. Then make the call, Jake said simply. But it won't change the truth of what happened here tonight. It won't change the fact that you're a bully who picked an easy target because you thought no one would challenge you. An easy target? Marcus snarled. She's obese. She's letting herself go. Why should I have to pretend to be attracted to someone who clearly doesn't respect herself enough to take care of her body? The words hung in the air like poison gas, and Jake felt something snap inside him. Not his restraint. That held firm, keeping his hands at his sides, his voice level. What snapped was his willingness to engage with this man, as if he were operating in good faith. You want to know why Claire and every other person who doesn't meet your narrow definition of acceptable deserves respect? Jake asked. It's not because of how they look. It's not because they've earned it through some arbitrary standard you've set. It's because they're human beings, and that's the only qualification necessary. He gestured toward the bar where Claire was still sitting, her face visible through the frosted glass partition. That woman is an architect. She designs buildings that thousands of people will use, spaces that will shape their daily lives. She creates beauty and function in the world. What do? You move money around and convince yourself that makes you superior. You've built your entire identity on surface-level achievements and surface-level judgments, and you call that success. A young man at another table raised his hand tentatively, like a student in a classroom. He was heavyset himself, wearing a slightly rumpled suit. I just want to say, I've been on the other end of comments like that. Multiple times, and it never stops hurting. So thank you for saying something. His date, a thin woman with kind eyes, nodded vigorously. I've made comments like that before, and I'm ashamed of it now. Hearing it said out loud like this, it's horrifying. Marcus looked around the restaurant, seeing for perhaps the first time that the tide had turned completely against him. Every face was looking at him with some combination of disgust, pity, or contempt. The power he'd walked in with, the easy confidence that came from money and looks and social status, had evaporated. He was standing in the middle of an upscale restaurant being judged by a room full of strangers, and for once in his life, he was coming up short. This is insane, he said, his voice rising with barely controlled rage. You're all acting like I committed some kind of crime. I just stated a preference. I'm allowed to have preferences. You're allowed to be shallow, Jake corrected. You're allowed to be cruel. You're allowed to be the kind of man who values appearance over character, but you're not allowed to do it without consequences. You're not allowed to assume that your money and your looks give you a free pass to treat people as disposable. Marcus's hands clenched into fists at his sides. For a moment, Jake thought he might actually swing. His body tensed automatically, his weight shifting to his back foot, his stance widening slightly. Years of de-escalation training had also included training in how to protect yourself when de-escalation failed. But Marcus didn't swing. Instead, he did something worse. He smiled. It was a cold, calculating smile that didn't reach his eyes. You think you've won something here, he said softly. You think this little moment of moral superiority means anything? Tomorrow, I'll wake up in my penthouse, drive my Aston Martin to my corner office, and make more money before lunch than you'll see all year. And you'll still be pouring drinks for people like me, living in whatever sad little apartment you can afford, raising your daughter on scraps. He gestured around the restaurant. And all of you self-righteous hypocrites, you'll go home and forget this ever happened. You'll go back to your own shallow judgments, your own private cruelties. Because that's what people do. They perform outrage for an audience, and then they return to their lives where nothing actually changes. The silence that followed was different again. It was heavier, darker, because there was an uncomfortable truth in what Marcus had said. The world didn't change because of one confrontation in one restaurant on one Friday night. People didn't suddenly become better versions of themselves because they witnessed someone being called out for cruelty. But Jake knew something Marcus didn't. He knew that change didn't happen in one dramatic moment. It happened in 1,000 small moments, 1,000 small choices to speak up instead of staying silent, to offer kindness instead of indifference, to see people instead of looking past them. "You're right," Jake said, surprising everyone, including Marcus. "Tomorrow you'll wake up rich, and I'll wake up working class. That won't change. But here's what else won't change. You'll still be the man who did this. You'll still be the man who chose cruelty when kindness cost you nothing. And every time you look in the mirror, somewhere deep down, you'll know that you're not the man you pretend to be. You're just a scared, insecure person who tears others down to feel tall." Marcus's smile vanished. "I'm going to ruin you," he said quietly. "I'm going to call the owner of this restaurant, who happens to be a client of mine, and I'm going to make sure you never work in this city again. You and that fat woman deserve each other. Enjoy your poverty." He turned and strode toward the door, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble floor. But before he reached it, something happened that made Jake's throat tighten with emotion. The older woman who had stood up earlier stepped directly into Marcus's path. She was a full foot shorter than him, but she stood her ground with the kind of authority that came from 7 decades of not tolerating nonsense. "Marcus Holloway," she said, and her voice carried across the entire restaurant. "I thought that name sounded familiar. You manage my son's portfolio at Whitmore and Associates, or rather, you did. First thing Monday morning, I'll be instructing him to transfer his accounts elsewhere. I will not have my family's money managed by a man of such poor character." Marcus's face went pale. "Mrs. Ashworth, please, this is a misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding," she interrupted coldly, "is the one I made in recommending your services to 3 of my friends, all of whom will be hearing about this evening. Good night, Mr. Holloway. I hope your watch was worth it." She stepped aside, and Marcus practically ran from the restaurant, his exit far less dignified than his entrance. The heavy oak door swung shut behind him, and the entire dining room released a collective breath they hadn't realized they'd been holding. Jake stood there, his heart pounding, his hands shaking slightly with the adrenaline dump that came after confrontation. He'd just done the most unprofessional thing possible. He'd made a scene in his workplace, lectured a customer, and potentially cost the restaurant a wealthy patron. He could very well lose his job over this, which meant he could lose his ability to support Lily, to keep their small apartment, to maintain the carefully balanced life he'd built from the ruins of his old one. But when he turned and saw Claire standing at the bar, tears streaming down her face, but with something like hope beginning to shine through the devastation, he knew he'd made the right choice. Claire didn't leave after Marcus stormed out. She stayed at the bar while the dinner service wound down, while couples paid their checks and left with backward glances and whispered conversations, while the servers began the closing routine of clearing tables and refilling salt shakers. She stayed because she didn't know where else to go, and because the man who had stood up for her was still there, moving behind the bar with quiet efficiency, and his presence felt like the only solid ground in a world that had tilted sideways. Jake didn't ask her to leave. He simply worked around her, occasionally refreshing her water, bringing her a small plate of the restaurant's famous tiramisu that he insisted was about to be thrown out anyway, a lie they both knew but didn't acknowledge. The other staff members gave them space, intuiting that something significant had happened, that this wasn't just a bartender being kind to a distressed customer. By 11 o'clock, the restaurant was empty except for the 3 of them, Jake, Claire, and Lily, who had fallen asleep at her corner table with her head pillowed on her math textbook, one hand still clutching her pencil. The little girl's breathing was soft and steady, her face peaceful in sleep, blonde hair falling across her cheek. Jake was wiping down the bar for the 3rd time, his movements mechanical, when Claire finally spoke. Her voice was hoarse from crying, from holding back words for hours. "Why did you do that?" she asked. "You could have lost your job. You still might lose your job. Why would you risk that for a complete stranger?" Jake set down his bar towel and met her eyes. In the dim lighting of the closed restaurant, with the chandeliers turned down to their lowest setting, his face looked different, older, more worn, but also more real, as if the bright lights of the dinner service had been hiding the truth of him, and now, in the quiet darkness, she could finally see it. Because I spent 4 years watching my wife die slowly, he said simply. 4 years of doctors and hospitals and treatments that gave us hope and then took it away. And through all of it, the worst moments weren't the physical pain or the fear. They were the moments when people looked at her and saw only her illness. When they couldn't see Emma anymore, just the cancer patient in the wheelchair, the woman with the scarf covering her bald head. She became invisible, even while she was still alive. He picked up a wine glass and began polishing it, his hands needing something to do. She made me promise her something, right before the end. She was 8 months pregnant with our second child, and the doctors said the pregnancy was accelerating the cancer's spread. They wanted her to terminate, to buy herself more time. But Emma refused. She said she'd already loved this baby for 8 months, and she wasn't going to stop now. Claire felt tears welling up again, but she stayed silent, letting him speak. She made me promise that I would teach Lily to see people, really see them. Not just the surface, not just what was convenient or comfortable, but the whole human being underneath. She said that's what the world needed most, people who would look at the invisible ones and refuse to let them disappear. Jake set down the wine glass and looked at Claire directly. So when I saw what that man did to you, when I saw him trying to make you invisible, trying to reduce you to nothing but a body that didn't meet his standards, I couldn't stay silent. Because if I stayed silent, I'd be breaking the only promise that matters. Did she make it? Claire whispered. Your wife? Did she have the baby? Jake's face crumpled for just a moment before he pulled it back together. She made it to 39 weeks. They did an emergency C-section when her heart started failing. Our son lived for 6 hours. Emma lived for 12. I got to hold them both, got to tell them I loved them, and then they were gone. Both of them. Just gone. The silence that followed was profound. Claire understood now why Jake had left his therapy practice, why he'd chosen to pour drinks instead of counsel the grieving. How could you help others navigate loss when your own had shattered you so completely? I'm an architect, Claire said finally, feeling like she owed him her own truth in exchange for his. I work for Morrison & Hayes, one of the big firms downtown. I design office buildings, mixed-use developments, places where thousands of people work and live. I'm good at what I do. Really good. I've won awards, had my work featured in magazines, built things that will outlive me by decades. She traced the rim of her water glass with one finger. But I spent my entire college career convinced I was too fat to deserve success. I had an eating disorder that nearly killed me. Bulimia. I'd eat and then purge, eat and purge, trying to whittle myself down to something acceptable. I ended up in the hospital twice, once for malnutrition and once for a torn esophagus from vomiting so much. Jake listened without interrupting, his therapist training evident in the quality of his attention. I got help eventually. Therapy, support groups, medication for the anxiety and depression underneath it all. I learned to eat normally again, to see food as fuel instead of the enemy. I gained weight, stabilized at a size 14, and told myself I was okay with it. Most days I am. Most days I look in the mirror and see a healthy, successful, capable woman. She laughed bitterly. But then someone like Marcus comes along and says what he said, and suddenly I'm 20 years old again, hunched over a toilet, hating myself. He's wrong, Jake said firmly. You know he's wrong, right? Not just morally wrong, but factually wrong. There's nothing wrong with your body. There's something wrong with his perception. I know that up here, Claire said, tapping her temple. But knowing something intellectually and believing it emotionally are two different things. I got divorced 2 years ago. My ex-husband was kind about it, didn't say anything cruel, just said we'd grown apart. But I always wondered if it was because I'd gained 15 pounds after we got married, if he'd looked at me one day and decided I wasn't enough anymore. And so you stopped dating entirely, Jake guessed. Until tonight, Claire confirmed. My friends convinced me it was time to try again. They set me up with Marcus, told me he was successful and handsome and looking for something serious. They meant well. They really did. But they didn't prepare me for the fact that I'd spent 2 years building up the courage to be vulnerable again, and it took him less than 5 minutes to tear it all down. From her corner table, Lily stirred in her sleep, making a small sound before settling again. Both Jake and Claire looked over at her, and Claire felt something shift in her chest. This man had lost so much, had been broken so completely, and yet he'd still found the strength to stand up for a stranger. He'd still kept his promise to his dying wife. "Can I meet her?" Claire asked softly. "Your daughter?" Jake smiled, a real smile that transformed his tired face. "She'd like that. Fair warning, though, she's going to ask you about a million questions. Subtlety is not her strong suit." He walked over to Lily's table and gently shook her shoulder. "Hey, Firefly, time to wake up. We're closing soon." Lily's eyes fluttered open, and she yawned widely, stretching her arms above her head. "Did I fall asleep on my math again?" "You did," Jake confirmed, helping her sit up. "But I think Mrs. Henderson will forgive you for having pencil marks on your face. There's someone I'd like you to meet." Lily looked over at Claire with the unguarded curiosity of a child, her hazel eyes so much like her father's, studying this new person in her territory. "Hi," she said brightly. "I'm Lily Morrison. I'm 9 years old and 3/4. Are you sad? You look like you've been crying." "Lily," Jake said gently, "remember what we talked about. Not every observation needs to be spoken out loud." "But Mommy said to always see people's feelings," Lily protested. "She said invisible feelings hurt the most." Claire felt her throat tighten. "Your mom was right. And yes, I was sad earlier, but your dad helped me feel better." Lily nodded sagely, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. "He's good at that. He used to be a doctor for sad people, but now he makes drinks for them instead. I think it's kind of the same thing, just with less tissues and more olives." Despite everything, Claire laughed. It was a small, broken sound, but it was genuine. "I think you might be right about that." "Do you want to see my math homework?" Lily asked, apparently satisfied with Claire's credentials. "I got stuck on problem 17. It's about fractions, and I hate fractions. They're like the worst kind of numbers." "I happen to love fractions," Claire said, surprising herself. "Mind if I take a look?" For the next 20 minutes, while Jake finished his closing duties, Claire and Lily bent their heads over the math worksheet together. Claire explained fractions using slices of the tiramisu Jake had given her, breaking it into pieces and showing Lily how 3/8 of a dessert was smaller than 1/2 but bigger than 1/4. Lily absorbed it all with the quick intelligence of a child who'd been struggling not because she couldn't understand, but because no one had explained it in a way that made sense to her. "You're really smart," Lily declared when they finished. "Are you an architect like the lady in my book?" Claire blinked. "You have a book about an architect?" "Yeah, it's about this woman who builds a library that looks like a castle. Daddy got it for me because he says I should know that girls can build things, not just live in the things boys build." Lily paused, then added with the brutal honesty of childhood, "Are you going to be Daddy's girlfriend? Because Daddy's been alone for a really long time, and Mrs. Gable says he needs to start dating again." "Lily," Jake said, his face flushing as he walked back over to them, "we do not discuss Daddy's dating life with strangers." "But she's not a stranger anymore," Lily pointed out reasonably. "We did math together. That makes us friends." Claire looked at Jake's embarrassed face, at Lily's innocent expectation, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't attraction, not exactly, though Jake was certainly handsome in his own worn, honest way. It was possibility. The sense that maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't as cruel as Marcus Holloway had made it seem for those terrible minutes. "I'm not going to be your dad's girlfriend," Claire said gently to Lily, "but I would like to be your friend if that's okay." "That's okay," Lily agreed. Then her face brightened. "Oh. Daddy talks about invisible people all the time. He says the world is full of people that other people don't see because they're too busy looking at phones or being important. Are you one of the invisible people?" Claire felt the question hit her like a physical blow, but not in a painful way. More like the shock of cold water that wakes you up, that makes you realize you've been sleepwalking through your own life. "I think maybe I was," she said slowly, "but your dad saw me." "That's because Daddy sees everyone," Lily said matter-of-factly. "It's his superpower. Mommy told him so." Jake's eyes were suspiciously bright as he scooped Lily up off her chair. All right, kiddo. Time to get you home and into bed. We've got the farmer's market tomorrow morning, remember? Can Claire come? Lily asked immediately. Claire probably has her own plans, Jake started, but Claire interrupted him. Actually, I'd love to come to the farmer's market, if that's okay. She looked at Jake, then at Lily, then back at Jake again. I don't want to go home yet. I don't want to be alone with what happened tonight. I want to be around people who see me. Jake studied her for a long moment, and Claire could see him weighing something, making some kind of internal calculation. Finally, he nodded. The market opens at 8. We usually get breakfast sandwiches from the vendor on the north corner. You're welcome to join us. As they walked toward the restaurant's front door together, Lily between them holding both their hands, Claire felt her phone buzz in her purse. She ignored it at first, then curiosity got the better of her. She pulled it out one-handed and saw a string of texts from her friend Jessica, the one who'd set up the disastrous date with Marcus. The first text said, "OMG Claire. I'm so sorry. Marcus just called and said it didn't work out. Are you okay?" The second said, "He said you guys just didn't click, no chemistry." The third said, "Call me tomorrow and we'll debrief. Love you." Claire stared at the messages, at the sanitized version of events Marcus had apparently fed to their mutual friend, and felt anger surge through her veins. He'd taken his cruelty and repackaged it as a polite non-connection. He'd erased what he'd done, made himself the victim of a bad setup rather than the perpetrator of deliberate harm. "He's lying," she said aloud. "Marcus, he's telling people we just didn't click. He's acting like what he did never happened." Jake had paused at the door, Lily yawning against his shoulder. People like him always do. They rewrite history to make themselves the hero. "Well, I'm not going to let him," Claire said, her voice hardening with determination. "I'm going to do something about this." "Like what?" Jake asked carefully. "Because if you're thinking about revenge, I should tell you that as a former therapist, I'm supposed to discourage that kind of thinking." "Len." "It's not revenge," Claire said. "It's accountability. And I just realized something. Marcus Holloway isn't just some random hedge fund manager. He works for Whitmore and Associates. They're one of the investment firms considering backing my company's biggest project, a mixed-use development downtown worth $200 million. There's a presentation dinner on Monday night where all the potential investors will be there, including representatives from Marcus's firm." Jake's eyes widened. "You're going to confront him there? At a professional event?" "Not exactly," Claire said, her architect's brain already building the structure of a plan. "I'm going to show him that his actions have consequences. That you can't treat people the way he treated me and expect to move through the world unchallenged." She looked at Jake directly. "And I want you to come with me." "Me?" Jake said, shocked. "Claire, I'm a bartender. I don't belong at a $200 million investment dinner." "You're not just a bartender," Claire said, echoing his words from earlier. "You're the man who stood up when everyone else stayed silent. You're the man who kept his promise to his dying wife. Your voice matters more than any credential or title ever could." She paused, then added, "Besides, Marcus needs to see that what he did didn't break me. That I'm still standing, and I'm standing with someone who sees my worth." Jake looked down at Lily, who had perked up at the mention of an adventure. "Can I come too?" she asked hopefully. "Absolutely not," Jake said. "This is a grown-up thing." "That's not fair," Lily pouted. "I want to help fight the bad guy too." "You'll help by staying with Mrs. Gable and being good," Jake told her. Then he looked back at Claire, and she could see the uncertainty in his face, the fear of stepping back into a world he'd left behind. "I don't know if this is a good idea." "Neither do I," Claire admitted, "but I'm done letting men like Marcus Holloway make me feel invisible. And I think you're done letting fear keep you small. So maybe we help each other be brave." Jake was quiet for a long moment, his hand on the restaurant's door handle, the night air waiting beyond. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, I'll come. But I don't have anything appropriate to wear to a fancy business dinner." "Leave that to me," Claire said, feeling something like hope beginning to burn in her chest where devastation had been just hours before. "I'll text you the details tomorrow after the farmer's market. And Jake, thank you. For everything. For seeing me when I needed to be seen." "That's what people are supposed to do," Jake said simply. "We're supposed to see each other." The weekend passed in a blur of farmer's market breakfast sandwiches, Lily's endless questions about building design, and Claire's growing certainty that Monday night was going to change everything. She'd bought Jake a suit, a simple charcoal gray that fit him perfectly after a quick tailoring appointment, and he'd accepted it with the uncomfortable gratitude of a man unused to receiving help. Now, standing in the private dining room of the Meridian Club, one of the city's most exclusive venues, Claire felt her confidence wavering. The room was all old money elegance, dark wood paneling, leather chairs, and a massive table that could seat 20, but tonight held only 12. The other investors were already seated, men and women in expensive suits nursing pre-dinner cocktails and making the kind of small talk that happened when millions of dollars were about to change hands. Claire's boss, Richard Morrison, was at the head of the table, his silver hair and commanding presence anchoring the room. He'd been skeptical when Claire insisted on bringing a guest, but he'd agreed when she'd explained vaguely that Jake had consulting expertise relevant to the project. Jake stood beside her near the entrance, looking distinctly uncomfortable in his new suit. He tugged at his collar for the third time in as many minutes. "I still don't understand what I'm supposed to do here," he whispered. "Just be yourself," Claire whispered back. "Watch, listen, and if you see something that doesn't feel right, speak up. Trust your instincts." "My instincts are telling me I don't belong in a room where the wine probably costs more than my rent," Jake muttered, but there was a hint of humor in his voice. That was when Marcus Holloway walked in. He was with two other people, a severe-looking woman in her 50s and a younger man who carried himself with the nervous energy of someone trying to impress. Marcus looked exactly as he had on Friday night, impeccably dressed, perfectly groomed, radiating that same casual arrogance. But when his eyes swept the room and landed on Claire, then on Jake beside her, his expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession. Shock, confusion, and then something ugly that twisted his handsome features into something cruel. He walked directly toward them, ignoring the other guests, his focus laser-sharp on Claire and Jake. "Well, well, well," he said, his voice loud enough to draw attention from the nearby investors. "This is unexpected. I didn't realize the restaurant staff made house calls." Jake's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Claire felt him go very still beside her, like a predator deciding whether to strike or wait. "Marcus," Claire said, her voice cool and professional, "I'm surprised to see you here. I was under the impression that Whitmore and Associates was sending their senior investment team." "I am the senior investment team," Marcus said, his smile sharp. "Associate Vice President of Strategic Acquisitions. I'm the one who decides which projects get funded and which ones die on the vine." He looked Jake up and down with exaggerated slowness. "And you brought your bartender boyfriend to a business dinner? That's an interesting choice. Very progressive of you." "Jake is here." "As my consultant," Claire said evenly, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. "He has expertise in evaluating the human element of large-scale projects." Marcus laughed, the sound carrying across the room. Several people turned to look. "The human element. Is that what we're calling it now?" "Claire, I appreciate the gesture, really I do. Bringing your pity date to make me jealous is adorable, but it's not going to work. What happened between us on Friday night was unfortunate, but let's not make it unprofessional." The words were carefully chosen, deliberately ambiguous. To anyone listening, it would sound like a relationship that had ended badly, not a cruel rejection delivered at full volume in a public place. Claire felt rage building in her chest, hot and righteous, but before she could respond, Jake spoke. "Associate Vice President," Jake said thoughtfully, as if testing the words. "That's an impressive title. How long have you been with Whitmore?" Marcus turned his full attention to Jake, his expression openly contemptuous. 3 years, not that it's any of your business." "And in those 3 years, how many projects of this scale have you personally overseen from acquisition to completion?" Jake asked. His voice was mild, conversational, but there was something underneath it that made Claire's architect brain recognize a structural weakness being probed. "Enough to know a bad investment when I see one," Marcus said. "And speaking of which, we should all take our seats. I have some concerns about this project that need to be addressed before any money changes hands." They moved to the table, Claire and Jake sitting side by side across from Marcus and his colleagues. Richard Morrison introduced everyone, and Claire learned that the severe woman was Patricia Chen, the actual senior partner from Whitmore, and the nervous young man was Daniel Kim, a junior analyst. The way Patricia's eyes lingered on Marcus with barely concealed irritation told Claire something interesting. This wasn't Marcus's show. He was just part of the team. Dinner was served, an elaborate multi-course affair that Claire barely tasted. The conversation flowed around the usual topics: market conditions, zoning regulations, projected returns on investment. Richard presented their proposal with his trademark eloquence, highlighting the sustainable design elements, the mixed-income housing component, and the innovative public spaces that would serve the surrounding community. Then, Marcus made his move. "I hate to be the voice of dissent," he said, setting down his fork with deliberate precision, "but I have serious concerns about the leadership of this project, specifically about Ms. Sanderson's ability to see it through." The table went quiet. Richard's face darkened. "Excuse me?" Marcus spread his hands in a gesture of false sympathy. "I've done my due diligence, as any responsible investor would, and I've discovered some troubling things about Ms. Sanderson's personal stability. She has a history of eating disorders, recently went through a difficult divorce, and has been making questionable decisions in her personal life that raise red flags about her professional judgment." Claire felt the blood drain from her face. He'd researched her. He'd dug into her medical history, her private life, and was now weaponizing it in front of the people who controlled her career. "That information is private and completely irrelevant to my professional qualifications," she said, her voice shaking with fury. "Is it, though?" Marcus asked, leaning back in his chair. "We're about to invest $200 million in a project that will take 5 years to complete. That requires stable, reliable leadership, someone who won't crack under pressure or let personal issues compromise their decision-making. And frankly, based on what I witnessed on Friday night, I'm not convinced Miss Sanderson has that stability." "What you witnessed on Friday night," Jake said quietly, and every eye turned to him, "was your own cruelty and her grace under fire. That tells me everything I need to know about both your characters." Marcus's face reddened. "Nobody asked for your input, bartender." "Actually, I did," Richard Morrison said, his voice sharp. "Jake is here at Claire's invitation, which means he's here at mine, and I'm very interested in hearing what he has to say." Jake nodded his thanks to Richard, then pulled out the folder Claire had given him over the weekend. It contained Marcus's investment proposal, the financial projections and risk assessments he'd submitted on behalf of Whitmore and Associates. Jake had spent Saturday night reading through it while Lily slept, his old therapist's ability to spot inconsistencies and patterns kicking in. "Mr. Holloway," Jake said, opening the folder, "your proposal suggests a projected return of 18% over 5 years, which is impressive. But I'm curious about the calculations underlying that projection. Specifically, page 14, where you estimate rental income from the commercial spaces." Marcus waved a hand dismissively. "Those numbers are based on current market rates for comparable properties." "Right, but the comparable properties you cited are all in the financial district, where commercial rent runs about $75 per square foot," Jake said, running his finger down the page. "This project is in the warehouse district, where the current rate is closer to $45 per square foot. Your projections assume financial district rates in a warehouse district location, which inflates your return estimates by roughly 40%. Patricia Chen leaned forward, suddenly very interested. "Is that true, Marcus?" Marcus's confident expression faltered for just a moment. "It's a conservative estimate based on the gentrification trend. As the neighborhood develops, rents will rise to match comparable areas." "Over what time frame?" Jake asked. "Because your projections show those rates being achieved in year 1, but gentrification is typically a 10 to 15-year process. Unless you have data suggesting this neighborhood is experiencing unusually rapid development?" "The data is proprietary," Marcus said quickly, "compiled by our internal research team." "Then perhaps Ms. Chen could verify that," Jake suggested, looking at the senior partner. "Because if the return projections are inflated by 40%, that significantly changes the risk-reward calculation for your investment." Patricia Chen was already pulling out her tablet, her fingers flying across the screen. Her face grew progressively darker as she read. "Marcus, I'm looking at the internal research database. We don't have any proprietary data on the warehouse district. Our analysts flagged it as an emerging market with moderate growth potential, not rapid gentrification. They must have updated their assessment, Marcus said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. I can follow up with them tomorrow. You do that, Patricia said coldly. In the meantime, let's continue with the presentation. I'm sure there are other aspects of the proposal that will hold up to scrutiny. But Jake wasn't finished. His therapist's instinct, honed over years of reading people's tells and inconsistencies, had caught something else. Mr. Holloway, you mentioned you've overseen multiple projects of this scale in your 3 years at Whitmore. Could you give us a specific example, just so we can understand your experience level with developments of this magnitude? Marcus's eyes darted to Patricia, then back to Jake. The Riverside Plaza project in 2021. $150 million mixed-use development. I was the lead associate. Patricia's head snapped up. No, you weren't. David Brennan was the lead on Riverside. You were part of the due diligence team. I played a significant role, Marcus insisted, his voice rising slightly. I was instrumental in securing the financing. You prepared spreadsheets, Patricia said flatly. That's not the same as being the lead associate. She turned to Richard Morrison, her expression apologetic. I'm deeply sorry for this confusion. Marcus was supposed to be here as support staff, not as the primary representative. I'm beginning to think there's been some miscommunication about his role in this evaluation. The table had gone very quiet. Claire watched as Marcus's carefully constructed facade began to crumble in real time. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by the desperate energy of a man watching his lies unravel in front of an audience. This is ridiculous, Marcus said, standing abruptly. I don't have to sit here and be interrogated by a bartender who's clearly been coaching his girlfriend to sabotage my career. Sit down, Marcus, Patricia said, her voice like ice. We're not finished. But Marcus had the look of a cornered animal. He pointed at Claire, his finger shaking with rage. She's unstable. I'm telling you, she's going to tank this project. She's fat, she's emotional, she's bringing her personal drama into professional settings. You want to invest $200 million with someone like that? The silence that followed was absolute. Even Marcus seemed to realize he'd gone too far, that he'd finally said the quiet part loud in a room full of people who held his career in their hands. Claire stood slowly. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. The fear and shame that had paralyzed her on Friday night were gone, burned away by the white-hot clarity of righteous anger. I'm going to say this once, Marcus, so I want you to listen very carefully. I am not unstable. I am not emotional. I am a brilliant architect who has spent 15 years designing buildings that improve people's lives. I have an eating disorder history that I've managed through therapy and medical care, which makes me strong, not weak. I went through a divorce that taught me what I will and won't tolerate in relationships, which makes me wise, not damaged. She placed both hands on the table, leaning forward. And as for bringing personal drama into professional settings, you're the one who just admitted you've been deliberately trying to sabotage my career because I rejected your advances on Friday night. I rejected you, Marcus sputtered. You're the one who... There are 12 people at this table who just watched you call me fat, emotional, and unstable, Claire interrupted. And there were 50 people in Venetian Rose on Friday night who heard you call me too fat to date before you walked out. One of those people was Mrs. Eleanor Ashworth, who I believe handles her family's considerable portfolio. The same Mrs. Ashworth who told you she'd be moving her accounts from Whitmore because of your behavior. Patricia Chen's face had gone from dark to thunderous. She pulled out her phone and typed something quickly. A moment later, her expression confirmed what Claire had suspected. Eleanor Ashworth withdrew $17 million from her family's accounts this morning, Patricia said softly. She specifically cited concerns about the character of our associates. She stood, gathering her materials with sharp, angry movements. Marcus, you're done here. You're done at this dinner, you're done on this project, and as soon as I get back to the office, you're going to be done at Whitmore. Daniel, you're taking over as primary analyst on this evaluation. Ms. Sanderson, Mr. Morrison, please accept my sincerest apologies. We'll need to reschedule the remainder of this presentation. That won't be necessary, Richard Morrison said. He pulled out his own phone and scrolled through it briefly before turning the screen to show Patricia. I had a feeling Mr. Holloway might be a problem, so I took the liberty of reaching out to your senior partners directly. Edward Whitmore himself called. Me this afternoon. He's already reviewed our proposal and given preliminary approval. He's very excited about the public space components and the affordable housing integration. Patricia's anger deflated slightly, replaced by professional relief. Edward approved it? Why didn't anyone tell me? Because he wanted to see how your team handled the evaluation, Richard said. He's been concerned about some of the younger associates getting ahead of themselves, making promises they can't keep, inflating their own importance. This was a test, Ms. Chen, and your team just failed spectacularly. All eyes turned to Marcus, who looked like he might be sick. His face had gone from red to white, his hands gripping the edge of the table. I can explain, he started, but Patricia cut him off. Don't. Just don't, she gestured to Daniel. Escort Mr. Holloway out of the building. Make sure security is aware he's no longer authorized to represent Whitmore in any capacity pending his formal termination. Daniel stood, looking uncomfortable but determined. Come on, Marcus, let's go. Marcus looked around the table, searching for an ally, for anyone who might step in and save him. But there was no one. The other investors were studiously avoiding his gaze. Richard Morrison looked satisfied. Patricia Chen looked disgusted, and Claire looked powerful, standing tall in her perfectly tailored suit, her shoulders back, her chin high. This isn't over, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Yes, it is, Jake said quietly. It was over the moment you chose cruelty over kindness, the moment you decided someone's worth could be measured by their appearance. It was over before it even started, Marcus. You just didn't know it yet. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, then turned and walked out of the dining room, with Daniel following close behind. The door closed with a soft click that felt impossibly loud in the heavy silence. Patricia Chen turned to Claire and extended her hand. Ms. Sanderson, I'm truly sorry for what you've had to endure, both on Friday night and here tonight. On behalf of Whitmore and Associates, I apologize, and I want you to know that we're still very much interested in this project. Edward's approval was genuine, not part of any test. Your work is exceptional, and we'd be honored to help bring it to life. Claire shook her hand, feeling something like vindication settle into her bones. Thank you, Ms. Chen. I appreciate that. As the dinner broke up and people began to leave, Richard Morrison pulled Claire aside. That was quite a performance, both of you. He nodded at Jake. I don't know what your story is, young man, but you have an impressive eye for detail and an even more impressive sense of when to speak up. If you ever decide you want to leave the bar industry, come see me. I could use someone like you. Jake smiled, but shook his head. I appreciate that, Mr. Morrison, but I've learned I'm exactly where I need to be. The aftermath of the business dinner should have felt like a complete victory. Claire's project was approved with full funding. Richard Morrison promoted her to senior design lead, making her one of the youngest people at that level in the firm's 50-year history. Her face appeared in Architectural Digest, alongside renderings of the development, which they'd named the Emma Morrison Commons, after Jake's late wife, at Claire's insistence. The professional triumph was everything she'd worked toward for 15 years, but as Claire stood in her corner office 3 weeks after Marcus's spectacular downfall, looking out at the city skyline, she felt something hollow echoing in her chest. She'd won. Marcus had lost. Justice, in its corporate form, had been served, yet nothing had fundamentally changed. Somewhere in this city, right now, someone else was being told they were too fat, too old, too ugly, too different. Someone else was having their humanity reduced to a single cruel observation. The victory felt personal, but not systemic, and Claire had spent enough years designing buildings to know that individual solutions didn't solve structural problems. She picked up her phone and called Jake. He answered on the second ring, slightly breathless. Hey, give me just 1 second. Lily's trying to convince me that 7:30 is a reasonable bedtime when we both know it's 8 o'clock. It's 7:45, Claire heard Lily's voice protest in the background. That's basically 8. And I'm reading the architecture book Claire gave me, which is educational, so it should count as extra time. Nice try, Firefly, Jake said, laughter in his voice. 5 more minutes, then lights out. The sound of footsteps, a door closing softly, and then Jake's attention was fully on Claire. Sorry about that. What's up? You sound like you're in your thinking voice. My thinking voice? Yeah, the one you use when you're trying to solve a problem that's bigger than a building, Jake said. I've learned to recognize it over the past few weeks. What's on your mind? Claire took a breath. I want to start a foundation for body positivity, mental health, recovery from public humiliation and trauma. I want to use my platform, my story, to help other people who go through what I went through. But I don't know if I'm the right person to lead something like that. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a public speaker. I'm just an architect who had a really bad date. You're not just anything, Jake said firmly. And yes, you should absolutely start that foundation. And if you need a therapist who specializes in exactly that kind of trauma, I might know someone who'd be interested in helping. That conversation had happened 6 months ago. Now, on a cool autumn evening, Claire stood backstage at the grand ballroom of the Hilton, waiting to give the opening speech for the first major fundraising gala of the Worth Foundation. The name had been Jake's idea. Not self-worth or net worth or any compound construction, just worth. Because that's what every person had, inherently, regardless of how they looked or what they owned or who loved them. Worth. The foundation had grown faster than Claire could have imagined. Her story, once it went public through a carefully crafted interview in the local paper, had resonated with thousands of people. The donations had poured in. So had the volunteers, the therapists, the activists, the educators. Jake had returned to therapeutic practice part-time, creating a specialized program for people recovering from public humiliation, body shaming, and social trauma. He still bartended 3 nights a week at Venetian Rose because, as he explained to Claire, he loved the connection, the intimate conversations, the feeling of being exactly where broken people needed someone to be. Their relationship had developed slowly, carefully, like 2 people who'd both been burned, learning to trust fire again. There had been no dramatic kiss after the business dinner. Instead, there had been coffee dates with Lily between them, asking a million questions about load-bearing walls and whether Claire thought dolphins were smarter than octopi. There had been late-night phone calls where they talked about Emma and Claire's ex-husband and the ways grief changed you. There had been the first time Claire had stayed over and woken up to find Lily making pancakes, slightly burned, but offered with such pure joy that Claire had eaten every bite. There had been the moment, 3 months in, when Jake had taken her hand across the table at a diner and said, "I'm falling in love with you, and it terrifies me because I don't know how to love someone without constantly being afraid I'm going to lose them." And Claire had squeezed his hand and replied, "Then we'll be terrified together, and maybe that's what makes it real." Now, listening to the gala's MC introduce her, Claire felt Jake's presence in the 3rd row like an anchor. He was there in his good suit, the one she'd bought him for the business dinner, with Lily beside him in a dress she'd picked out herself, forest green with pockets, because as she'd informed everyone, dresses without pockets were a crime against practicality. Claire walked onto the stage, the spotlight bright and warm, and looked out at the 300 people who'd paid $200 a plate to support a foundation built on the idea that everyone deserved to be seen. She'd prepared a speech, had note cards in her pocket, but when she reached the microphone, she found she didn't need them. 6 months ago, she began, her voice steady, a man I'd never met looked at my body and decided it was acceptable to destroy my dignity in a room full of strangers. He said I was too fat to deserve his time, his attention, his basic human respect. And he walked out, confident that his cruelty would have no consequences, because that's what the world had taught him, that some people matter and some people don't, and he was the one who got to decide which was which. The room was utterly silent, 300 people leaning forward in their seats. But there was another man in that restaurant, Claire continued, a man who was just trying to do his job, to support his daughter, to honor a promise he'd made to his dying wife. A man who could have stayed silent, who had every reason to stay silent, who had nothing to gain and potentially everything to lose. And he stood up. He stood up and he said, "No, this is wrong. This stops here." And that moment changed everything. She found Jake's eyes in the crowd. He was crying, she realized, tears streaming down his face while Lily held his hand, and watched her father with the fierce protectiveness of a child who understood somehow that this was important. This foundation exists because one person chose courage over comfort, Claire said. Because one person decided that seeing someone's humanity was more important than protecting his own peace. But here's what I've learned in the 6 months since that night. We can't wait for someone else to be that person. We can't hope that when we're the one being humiliated, someone will step in and save us. We have to be that person for each other, every single one of us. She gestured to the crowd. In this room right now, there are people who have been told they're too fat, too thin, too dark, too light, too old, too young, too much, not enough. There are people carrying shame that was handed to them by someone else's cruelty. And I'm here to tell you that you can set it down. That shame doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the people who tried to make you carry it, and you have every right to give it back. The applause started small and built like a wave, growing until it filled the entire ballroom. Claire stepped back from the microphone, overwhelmed, and then stepped forward again because she wasn't quite finished. "One more thing," she said, waiting for the applause to quiet. "After we're done here tonight, after you've written your checks and taken your photos and gone back to your lives, I want you to remember that the work doesn't end here. The next time you see someone being diminished, being made small, being treated as less than human, you have a choice. You can stay silent, or you can stand up. You can walk past, or you can be the person who says, 'No, this stops here.' That's what this foundation is about, not just healing the people who've been hurt, but creating a world where fewer people get hurt in the first place." The gala was a success by every measure. They raised $400,000, enough to fund the foundation's programs for the next year and expand into 3 new cities. Claire shook hands until her arm ached, accepted congratulations, and shared stories until her voice went hoarse. But the moment she'd remember, the one that would stay with her, came 2 hours later. Jake had suggested they cap off the evening with a late dinner at Venetian Rose. It was a Thursday night, relatively quiet, and Claire had been hesitant at first. The restaurant held complicated memories, both beautiful and painful. But Jake had insisted, and when they arrived with Lily between them, Claire understood why. The host recognized them immediately and seated them at a table with a view of the bar, where Jake's replacement, a young man named Carlos, was efficiently handling the evening's modest crowd. The restaurant felt different now. Not because anything physical had changed, but because Claire was different. She wasn't the devastated woman who'd sat here 6 months ago, shattered by cruelty. She was someone who'd taken that moment and transformed it into something that mattered. They were halfway through their appetizers, Lily entertaining them with a detailed explanation of why penguins were the most architecturally sound birds when Claire saw him. Marcus Holloway walking through the restaurant's entrance with a woman Claire didn't recognize. The woman was beautiful in a conventional way, tall and slim with carefully styled hair, and she looked nervous in the way people do on first dates. Claire's first instinct was to leave, to avoid the confrontation, to protect the peace she'd built. But then she saw Marcus's expression as he looked at his date up close for the first time. She saw the way his lip curled slightly, the way his eyes did a quick dismissive scan of her body. The woman was wearing a dress that might have been a size 10 or 12. Nothing that would register as anything but normal on any objective scale. But Claire could see Marcus's judgment forming like storm clouds. They were shown to a table not far from Claire's, and as Marcus's date sat down and smiled hopefully at him, Marcus leaned back in his chair with an expression Claire knew all too well. He was about to say something cruel. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, the practiced way he was preparing to deliver a blow disguised as honesty. "You know," Marcus said, his voice carrying in the quiet restaurant, "I have to say—" "Don't," Jake said. The single word cut across the space between tables. Marcus's head snapped toward Jake, and for a moment his face went through a complicated series of expressions: recognition, fear, anger, and finally a kind of desperate bravado. "Excuse me," Marcus said. "I said don't," Jake repeated. He stood up from his chair, and Claire felt her heart swell with pride and love and something fiercer than either. "Whatever you're about to say, whatever cruelty you've been crafting in your head, don't say it. That woman you're with deserves better than whatever you're preparing to deliver." Marcus laughed, but it was a hollow sound. "This again? You're going to lecture me again?" "I'm not lecturing you," Jake said. "I'm just making sure you know you're being watched, that your behavior has witnesses, and those witnesses will Hold you accountable. And then something remarkable happened. The older couple at the table next to Marcus stood up. Claire recognized them. They'd been there 6 months ago, had witnessed the original confrontation. "He's right," the older man said. "We saw what you did last time, and we're not going to sit silently if you do it again." Another person stood, then another. Within 30 seconds, half the restaurant was on their feet, creating a wall of human decency between Marcus and his potential victim. No one was yelling, no one was threatening. They were simply standing, bearing witness, refusing to allow cruelty to go unchallenged. Marcus's date looked around, confused. "What's going on?" "Ask him," Claire said gently, standing as well. "Ask him what he did in this restaurant 6 months ago. Ask him why all these people know his name." The date looked at Marcus, and whatever she saw in his face was answer enough. She stood, grabbed her purse, and said with quiet dignity, "I think I'm going to go. But thank you, all of you, for whatever this was." She walked out, her head high, and Marcus was left standing alone, surrounded by people who'd decided that this time, in this place, cruelty would not be allowed to flourish unchallenged. "You people are insane," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. He threw some bills on the table and left quickly, his confident stride from 6 months ago replaced by something that looked a lot like shame. The restaurant erupted in spontaneous applause, but it wasn't for Marcus's departure. It was for the collective choice they had all made to stand up, to refuse to be bystanders. Claire saw Carlos, the new bartender, wiping his eyes with his bar towel. She saw the older couple embracing, clearly emotional. She saw Lily looking up at her father with an expression of pure admiration. "Daddy," Lily said, "you did it again." "We did it again," Jake corrected, gesturing to the room. "All of us." They sat back down to finish their meal, but the energy in the restaurant had shifted. People were talking to each other across tables, sharing their own stories, exchanging phone numbers and promises to stay in touch. A community had formed in the space where cruelty had tried to take root, and Claire understood that this was what the foundation was really about. Not just helping individuals heal, but creating a culture where healing was possible because people refused to look away. After dinner, Jake excused himself to talk to Carlos at the bar. Claire watched them converse, saw Carlos nodding intently at whatever Jake was saying. When Jake returned, he was smiling. "What was that about?" Claire asked. "He wanted me to know that he was here that night 6 months ago," Jake said. "He was training, shadowing the evening bartender. He saw everything that happened, and he said it changed him. He'd been planning to go into finance, follow the money, the whole corporate track. But watching what happened that night, watching how much it mattered to just stand up and speak the truth, he decided he wanted to do something that connected him to people instead. That's why he took the bartending job." "That's beautiful," Claire said softly. "He also said he wants to comp our champagne," Jake added with a grin. "Which is perfect, because I have something I want to ask you, and champagne seems appropriate." Claire's heart started beating faster. "Jake, what?" But he was already moving, standing up from his chair and walking to the exact spot where he'd confronted Marcus 6 months ago. The same spot where he'd delivered his speech about worth and humanity and the courage to stand up. He gestured for Claire to join him, and she did, her legs feeling shaky, her mind racing ahead to what might happen next. Jake took her hands in his, and the restaurant, which had been buzzing with conversation, went quiet again. But this was a different kind of quiet. This was anticipation, joy, the collective breath-holding of people who recognized they were about to witness something beautiful. "Claire Sanderson," Jake said, his voice clear and strong. 6 months ago, you sat in this restaurant and someone tried to make you invisible, tried to convince you that you were less than you are, and you survived it. More than survived, you transformed it. You took that moment of cruelty and you built something beautiful from it. You built a foundation that's already helping thousands of people. You built a life that matters. You built a space in my life and in Lily's life that we didn't even know was empty until you filled it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I'm not a wealthy man. I can't give you penthouses or expensive cars or any of the things society says prove you're successful. But I can give you this. I can give you my promise that I will see you every day for exactly who you are. I will stand up for you, stand beside you, stand with you through whatever comes. I will teach our children, Lily and whatever other children we might have, to see people the way my Emma taught me to see them. He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band with a single small diamond. This was my grandmother's ring. She was a seamstress who came to this country with nothing and built a life through hard work and fierce love. She taught me that real wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the number of people who would stand up for you when you needed them. And Claire, you're the richest person I know by that metric. Tears were streaming down Claire's face. Around them, people were crying too, strangers moved by the rawness of the moment. So I'm asking you, here in the place where our story began, where you showed me that it's never too late to choose courage, will you marry me? Yes, Claire said, her voice breaking on the word. Yes, absolutely yes. Jake slipped the ring onto her finger, and the restaurant erupted in applause for the second time that night. But this time, it was pure joy, uncomplicated by anything but the shared happiness of witnessing two people choose each other. Lily launched herself at both of them, wrapping her arms around their legs and shouting, "I'm going to be a flower girl. Can I wear my green dress with the pockets?" "You can wear whatever you want," Claire said, scooping Lily up and holding her while Jake wrapped his arms around them both. They stood there, a family forged from broken pieces, held together by the radical choice to see each other fully. Carlos brought over champagne, just as he'd promised, along with a Shirley Temple for Lily with extra cherries. "On the house," he said, "and thank you for everything, for showing me what it looks like to stand up." As they raised their glasses, Claire looked around the restaurant at all the faces watching them with smiles and tears. She thought about the Worth Foundation, about the thousands of people who would be helped by the work they'd started. She thought about Marcus Holloway, wherever he was, and hoped that someday he'd understand what he'd lost by choosing cruelty over connection. But mostly, she thought about this moment, this perfect, imperfect, beautiful moment where everything had come full circle. The place that had been a site of her deepest humiliation had become the place where she'd found love, purpose, and a family. The man who'd stood up for her when she couldn't stand up for herself had become her partner, her equal, her future, and the little girl who'd been doing math homework in the corner had become the daughter of her heart. "To standing up," Jake said, raising his glass. "To being seen," Claire added. "To pockets and dresses," Lily declared solemnly, and they all laughed as they clinked glasses. "So here's what I want to know from you, wherever you are in the world right now, whatever brought you to this story. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, and give me just one word that captures how this story made you feel. Because your presence here matters, your voice matters. You matter exactly as you are, and I want to know you're out there. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you that you deserve to be seen, that your worth isn't determined by someone else's shallow judgment, please consider subscribing. There are so many more stories waiting to be told, stories about ordinary people choosing extraordinary courage, about love found in unexpected places, about the power of standing up when it would be easier to stay silent. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being the kind of person who believes that stories like this matter. Because they do. They matter because you matter, and every single one of us has the power to be the person who stands up, who speaks out, who refuses to let cruelty go unchallenged. Until the next story finds us, remember this: you are not too much. You are not too little. You are exactly enough. Exactly as you are. And if the world tries to tell you otherwise, I hope you find your own Jake, someone who will stand up and remind you of your worth. But more than that, I hope you become someone's Jake. I hope you're the person who stands up when it matters, who speaks truth when silence would be easier, who sees people when the world tries to make them invisible. Be brave, be kind, and never forget that the smallest act of courage can change someone's entire world.